Good day, and my name is Rhys and I'm going to give you a little bit of a lived experience share about how I went from being an international professional rugby player to then being in the realms of mental health and well-being. And to do this, I'm going to take us back about 11 years. About 11 years ago, I was playing for the Scarlets in West Wales. I literally thought I had the world at my feet, playing the game I loved. I had a beautiful wife, 4 wonderful kids. I just agreed a very large 6-figure contract to move over to France. And then one day I was in the gym at the Parky Scarlets doing an interval session on the bike when my life literally changed in a heartbeat. So when I ask you to have a look at this image of me on the screen, I want you to be able to just shout out now, just shouting out to Matt about what is it that you see when you look at this image of me on the screen. Well, I'll tell you what it is that I see when I look at this picture of me. I see a boy in a man's body. I see a man disconnected from mind, body, and spirit. I see an inauthentic man, a man that is not only sick in the body, but also sick in the mind. My name is Rhys and I was actually born in Johannesburg, South Africa. And at the age of 18, I decided to move to the land of my father, to Wales, in the pursuit of international rugby. Now, when I turned up to Wales, within the first 6 months, I was selected by Wales under 19s, where we would go to South America, to Chile, to the under 19 World Cup. We would actually finish 4th at that year's World Cup. A year later, I was selected by Wales under 21s, where we would go on to win the under 21 Six Nations with a Grand Slam. And later on that year, we would finish 5th at the World Cup in England. Just after that World Cup, I was to sign my very first professional contract with the Newport Gwent Dragons. And I can tell you now, those next 3 years that I spent as a professional were amazing. They were everything that I could have dreamt, that I could have wanted as a young man. It was exciting to become the regular starter for my club. My contract was going up year on year. I met my future wife. I had my first beautiful child, Morgan, in 2006. Then, just in the summer of 2006, I was selected to go on my first rugby senior tour with Wales back to South America, but this time to Argentina, where in the second test in Buenos Aires, I would come off the bench for my very first cap for my country. Now, this was a beautiful experience, something that I had dreamt of from a young man. And when I left that tour from Argentina, I was incredibly determined to become the starting prop for Wales. I can now tell you and reflect upon those next 3.5 years that I spent in the Welsh team and tell you that it was everything that I wished it would have been from a young boy, both on and off the pitch. You know, those experiences, to have that little bit of fame and recognition, to be able to play in front of these huge crowds at beautiful stadiums like the Principality. You know, these memories of running out in front of 75,000 people, hearing that noise, the crowd screaming for you to succeed, to sing this beautiful anthem. It is such an amazing experience, something that I will never forget. One thing though, however, is that I never really can remember the match day experience. It was always quite a blur to me. But there was one thing that I can remember very well, and that was the night out afterwards. Now, it's one thing playing in front of 75,000 people in Cardiff. It's another whole ball game, going out in town, in your black tie, having played for Wales. Everywhere you go, it's red carpet treatment, VIP, free alcohol, people offering you drugs, women throwing themselves at you. Just remembering that 5 years prior, I was just a working class boy from Johannesburg. The next thing you know, I think I'm the king of Cardiff. And this began to have a massively detrimental impact on my ego. And slowly, over those next few months and years, I started to take unnecessary risks. I started to make poor decisions, bad choices. And eventually, by the end of 2009, the Welsh management had seen enough. I was getting locked up off the pitch for doing all sorts of stupid things. And eventually, when they let me go out of that squad, my pride and my ego was hurt big time. But instead of just doubling down and maybe admitting that the size of the occasion had got the better of me, I went the other way. I fell out of love with the game. I left the Dragons and moved down to the Scarlets on what was at the time the biggest contract for a prop in Wales. But needless to say, my first 2 years with the Scarlets was not good at all. I was injured for almost the entirety of the first 2 seasons. Because off the pitch, my social life was chaos. Heavy drinking, drug taking, risk taking of every description. Till eventually in my last year of contract, I thought to myself, what the hell am I doing? I'm a 29-year-old man. I got at least another 2 contracts under my belt. Why don't I just sort myself out, go back to doing what I do best, and hopefully one day, at least secure the family home for me and my kids. And ironically, that is what I did. In 2012, I probably played the best rugby of my life. I pre-contractually agreed to move over to France on a very large 6-figure contract. Then one day I was in the gym doing an interval session on a bike, and just like that, it all changed. Now, I was very, very fortunate to survive. I had a huge heart attack at the Parky Scarlets, and I was rushed to the hospital in Swansea in Morriston, where I was to undergo life-saving surgery, where I had a quadruple bypass. And when I woke up from this operation, my life had changed forever. Not only now was I disabled, I could have to take 3 or 4 stops just to walk a very short distance because I was so out of breath. But I had lost the thing that mattered most to me in my life, and that was my rugby career. And I was devastated. And over the course of those next few weeks and months, what was a physical battle became a huge mental battle. Because I didn't know how to deal with that. Because I didn't know how to deal with the guilt, the shame and remorse that I had from my past. But equally, I could not see a positive future. And this began to this battle in my mind. Now, as my mental health began to deteriorate, so did my physical health. And in 2013, I got told I had roughly about 12 months to live by the doctors. My only other option was to be implanted with a machine that keeps me alive to this day. This machine sucks the blood out of the left side of my heart, pumps it back through a tube that is connected to my aorta. And this is run externally by a set of batteries. They're just lithium batteries that last 8 hours a set. And after 8 hours, if I don't plug them into a new set, the machine can stop, my heart can stop, and I can die. Now, I was again very, very fortunate to survive this operation. I didn't actually wake up for 2 weeks post-op because I was in a coma. But when I did wake up now, I was now literally half man, half machine. And you can imagine, in the space of 2 years, I've gone from an international professional rugby player to now disabled, with a machine they can't tell me how long that it can last, with a set of batteries that if I don't change them after 8 hours, I can die. Now you can only imagine, as a man, I did not know how to deal with this. I did not have the emotional or mental capacity to deal with this. And over those next few weeks and months, I began to struggle with my reality. I began to always be in the past, always in the future, always in the mind with these negative thoughts. And I couldn't deal with that. And the only way I knew how to get out of here was to use one thing that I had a terrible relationship with my whole life. And that thing was alcohol. And sadly, between the years 2016 and 2019, with this machine on the heart transplant waiting list, it wasn't enough to prevent me from becoming an alcoholic. I wasn't your typical brown paper bag alkie. I was more like your Friday, Saturday, Sunday drinker. But when I would drink until I blacked out. I would wake up in hospital beds, police cells, taxis, nightclubs, the street. And sometimes my friends would find me, my batteries would be beeping. They couldn't wake me up. They would have to ring my wife at 3, 4 in the morning to ask her how to switch my batteries so that I didn't die. You can only imagine the stress that this put on my family, my wife, but most importantly, my children. Now, thankfully for me, on the 1st of September in 2019, I crashed my car drunk. Now, I say thankfully because no one else was injured, nor myself, that evening. But the events that followed were enough for me to know that I had a very big problem and that things were going to need to change. Now, I didn't quite realize how bad my problem actually was. But 5 months later, whilst on a family holiday, 3 of my best friends, my dad and my brother, staged an intervention and sent me to a rehab facility in Cape Town. Now, I didn't want to go. I didn't think my problems were that bad. But the minute I walked through those doors of rehab, I knew I was in the right place. I learned more about myself in those next 28 days than I did in 37 years as a man. And one of the greatest lessons I learned early on in that time in the rehab center was about the power of vulnerability. To be able to be surrounded by complete strangers, addicts of every description, and be able to share with them in an environment without judgment about my suffering, my sadness, my grief. And slowly over those next few weeks, I began to address some of those damages and these thoughts that were going on in my mind. And this allowed me to ask some fundamental questions. And one of those was about how much had fear impacted my life. From a young man, the fear of rejection and confrontation, to then through my career, the fear of failure and judgment, to then after my heart attacks, the fear of death and the unknown. And this led me to ask one of the greatest questions I ever asked myself. And it's a question I'm going to ask you here today. If I was to give all of you in this room a piece of paper and a pen, and I was to ask you to write on this piece of paper, who am I? Who am I? Would you know? And if you don't know, that's okay. Because I was a 29-year-old man with 4 children, and I didn't know who the hell I was. Now, I can tell you this was absolutely terrifying. But the one thing that I knew from this point was that I couldn't continue to live in the way that I had, because I had lived a life without a value system, without a moral compass. And from this point, I also needed to know that I needed a purpose, because 2 things happened when I lost my career. One thing was I lost my identity, and the other one was I lost my purpose. And when I lost those 2 things, my life went down the drain. When I left rehab, I had a clear why, and my why was my children. That was why I wanted to change. And then my purpose then was to help others. I wasn't sure how initially, but when I began to share my story with others, I then also came out of back to Wales, out of rehab, and joined up with my good friend Matt to create this charity that you see today at TidyButt. Now, we are working from every sector, from education all the way up to corporate, and it's been incredibly rewarding. And I think one thing why I share my message like this is to let people know that change is possible. And no matter how bad things seem, for me, the sharing my experience with others had a hugely beneficial impact on my life. And this is what we intend and try to do with TidyButt, is create these environments for people to feel themselves, to allow vulnerability to be a strength and not a weakness. So thank you for listening. That was a little bit about my life and what brought me from my rugby career to the realms of mental health and well-being. I'm going to hand you back now to Matt, and he's going to go through a little bit of an educational about mental health and well-being.